what is the visa bulletin, number one. Number two, what are the predictions?
Okay. So the visa bulletin is something that's put out by the U.S. Department of State on a monthly basis, because the number of people who can immigrate to the U.S. is numerically limited. 226,000 people can immigrate through the family preferences, and 140,000 people can immigrate through the employment preferences. Although I must say that if not all the family preference visas are given out, or not all the employment visas are given out, then the next year, the unused numbers are given to the other category. So in the last year, because the pandemic has been so severe, the embassies have been operating on very, very limited capacity. So over 150,000 of the 226,000 family numbers are not going to be given out by the end of September, which is the end of the government's fiscal year. It's not the calendar year. It's October 1st to September 30th each year. So those numbers will be transferred over to the employment numbers, which is fantastic news for the nurses, because the predictions by Charlie Oppenheim from the State Department, which I put on my website, we have a visa bulletin prediction page. He is now doing a video once a month, and you can join it. You can ask questions. Used to be for 40 years, it was just us lawyers that, I would have dinner with Charlie and we'd talk about this. But, if you were a nurse in the Philippines, you wouldn't be able to have dinner with Charlie. Yeah. But now at least you can join him on these monthly videos, and you can ask questions about it. This year, Charlie has said that starting October 1st, there will be a minimum of 290,000 employment-based green cards.
Wow.
That's over double the normal number. That has never happened in my career. That will never happen again. So this is the perfect time if you're going to immigrate through a job.
290,000.
And he said minimum. It could be over 300,000. He doesn't know until after September 30th. But this is a fantastic opportunity. I know Tanya and I, we've talked about this before, but as recently as October 2015, so only 6 years ago, took 7 years for us to, under the visa bulletin, for a Filipino nurse to come to the U.S. Now it's current. So if it has a C on the visa bulletin, that means there's no waiting time. Now, of course, it takes time to process the I-140, to get your documents through the National Visa Center, to set up an appointment. So all of that could take a year or something, but at least you're not waiting in some 7-year-long wait. And that 7-year-long wait could come back in a couple of years. So if you want to come to the U.S., there's never been a more perfect time. Now, to go through the visa bulletin really quickly, I have it on my webpage, but I could put you all to sleep, doing this. So there's 5 different family let's forget about the family categories for a minute. There's 5 different employment categories, and we call them EB, employment-based. So employment, EB 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The 5th is for people with $1 million who are investing, and the first preference, EB1, is for people of extraordinary ability. Most nurses are in the EB3 category, which includes professionals, skilled workers, and unskilled workers. And it's current for the Philippines. The only countries that are backed up in EB3 are India and China, okay? And they have severe backlogs, especially India. So if you are going to immigrate as a nurse, you're going to be in the EB category. Your spouse and kids will also be in the EB category. There is a numerical limit per country. So no country can get over 7% of those 140 or 290,000 green cards. So, keep that in mind. When it starts backing up, we call that retrogression, and everybody's afraid of retrogression. I've had a dozen Filipino nurses write me in the last few weeks about retrogression. I don't expect, and Charlie, more important than what I expect, Charlie doesn't expect any retrogression, at least in the first few months of the coming year. So from October until next spring, the Philippines should be current. Usually if it is retrogression, it comes in the last 2 months of the year because they've given out so many green cards. So that would be August or September. And that might not happen. It just depends how open the embassies become, because right now a lot of nurses are having big problems trying to get interviews. The embassy is only partially open because of the pandemic and because of the last administration not being too friendly with immigration. They have not hired enough State Department employees to do all the required interviews. So they're in the process of doing that, but they have to undergo background checks. So it takes a few months for that to happen. A couple other things about the visa bulletin. I said, your spouse and your kids that are unmarried and under 21 can come. But there is something called the Child Status Protection Act, a law that Congress passed in 2002. So the amount of time that your I-140 was pending, from the date that it was submitted to the date it was approved, not the date you got your interview. So that might be a few months, but that can be subtracted from the child's age at the time your visa number becomes available. So what they have is they have something called the final action date chart. And on the final action date chart every month, it says, okay, here, right now it's current, but if there's a backlog, it might say June 1st, 2020, and only people who have priority dates, and the priority date is established by when that I-140 was filed for the nurse. So people before that date, if their I-140 was received by immigration, that's the priority date. So when that priority date comes up, if your child just turned 21, 3 weeks before that, but the petition was pending for 5 months, then that 5 months gets subtracted from the child's age. So the child is locked in at 20 years old. It's a complicated thing, and I have some videos on my site if you want to get into the Child Status Protection Act. And then
sorry to interrupt you, Carl, but we did actually cover that also yesterday, and I think I saw a question in the chat of somebody who had a question about that. I'm just looking as we're speaking, and we got 2 more minutes of the show. But that I think it's really on a case-by-case basis, right? You've got to evaluate the specific.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to mention one other thing, and I'll be quick, but cross-chargeability. So, if you're born in the Philippines, then you're going to be under the Philippine quota, and right now it's current, so you're in good shape. But if it starts backing up, and let's say your spouse was born in another country, you can use your spouse's country of birth if that makes your green card faster. So just something to keep in mind.
And that can also be very helpful for a lot of nurses that were born in India, if their spouse was born in a country that's current, correct?
That's exactly right. India is a big mess.